It's an information session on the next education workforce. I'm going to be your host, Brent Maddin. That's me in the previous century. I'm a nationally board certified teacher. I'm high school biology, chemistry, physics, physical science. And then I spent 20 years preparing educators to enter classrooms that in many cases, the people that I most wanted to be my own now children's teachers, they're 8 and 10. I saw them peeling out of the classroom much too quickly. And so I came to ASU about 5 years ago because our dean, Carol Basile, was asking this big question, which is like, wait, like, what if we don't have, just a teacher shortage problem, but we've got a workforce design problem? What if we don't have people that are leaving the teaching profession, but they're leaving the working conditions? And what if we could do something about that? And so I sit before you humbly as a person lucky enough to try to build a movement of other folks literally around the country and world that are interested in hanging out and learning together about how we might challenge one of the most fundamental grammars of schooling, which is how we bring our adults around young people. So buckle up. This is going to be fun. I want to start with 4 big observations at the top of this. The first is, I would argue that the current one teacher, one classroom, default normative model of staffing our schools creates crisis on a daily basis. Try to make that point. 2, I think that the role of quote unquote teacher is monolithic, and that we aren't thinking more broadly about like the way that we could have other roles in the profession. I think that in part because of that, we're leaving tons of talent on the table in terms of people that want to be involved in the enterprise of education. And we've created systems and structures that make it really hard for them to be involved. And then finally, I think it's really hard to meet the needs of all of our learners, especially some of our most vulnerable learners, in the way that we typically staff our schools. And so why would we go about taking this moment to design the next education workforce? At the highest level, student achievement from a statistical perspective is increasing a bit over time, but like there's 35 in Arizona, like 35% of our third graders are actually reading on grade level. This is not because we don't have great educators working tirelessly day in and day out. I think that we are I don't know that we've staffed our schools right to actually be able to deliver on the promise of student achievement, much less a much broader definition of student outcomes, right? To include sense of belonging and love and wanting to come to school. And I think that we have a lot of work to do there. I think that we also in the United States have 3.5 million classrooms that we have to staff literally every single day. And that if a single person is missing from any one of those single classrooms, we actually have a point of crisis, right? Like you can't have a room full of kids without an adult with them. Or maybe we could, but like the law doesn't say that we can do that. And really in our heart of hearts as a parent, I don't think we should do that. Yet we've created a system where literally there's like 3.5 million possible points of crisis and failure every single day. And that's really kind of weird that we've created a system with so little flexibility. And the reason for that is that most of our classrooms are staffed like this, where we've got one teacher, and if you're lucky, 25 kids, and that we expect that one person to be all things to all people at all times. I hope you like your teacher. I hope your teacher likes you, because this is the way that it works, either all day long in elementary school or until some Pavlovian bell rings in secondary school, and then a whole new group of kids come into the room. So we know that there's a lot that we expect of our educators. There's 173 in-task competencies arranged around 10 standards, right? Like that's even before we've talked about like anti-bullying or, even more in terms of brain-based learning or really, really sophisticated needs that we need to meet with individual kids. The schedule for educators is really inflexible. Like, I hope you don't have a doctor's appointment until like June, because otherwise it's going to be really hard. Teachers don't have a lot of autonomy. The job is ironically really isolating. There's a general and permeating feeling, at least in the United States, of disrespect. We're seeing data that families are telling their own kids not to become teachers. You watch like Minions, and it's like, like the teacher is like, yeah, don't go into teaching kids, right? Like this is in our water, and these are the messages that our kids are hearing from educators and from their own families. And if there's a single word that I would use to describe educators generally, and this is myself as a nationally board certified teacher too, like, holy cow, it's hard. It's like, it's overwhelming. And we built this. So this big question of what if we just, actually have a design problem as opposed to a shortage problem? And what might we do about that? And I would go so far as to say that this is also an equity problem. And that if we know that having access to a truly great educator is one of the biggest difference makers for a young person, we also know that having that access is not uniformly distributed, and that for students from low-income backgrounds, students of color, you're disproportionately likely to have first-year teachers. You're disproportionately likely to have under or unqualified teachers. That like this is just part of the way that the system has organized itself, both either by design or unintentionally. And I believe that we have an opportunity to do something about this. And so when I think about this equity question, I think about my own children. You could think about your own kids if you have them, or nieces, nephews, nibblings, the neighbor kid. I want to position this in third grade because that's just like, I've got a third grader. And so I think about Alice, and I think about, do I want teacher A, also a nationally board certified teacher, A+ at math and reading, was the, city, state's national teacher of the year, works with 25 kids? Or do I want Alice to have a person that just left being an engineer at Honeywell, 4 years ago? This person is never going to say to a group of young girls, I'm really a math person. This person is like, they love math and science. They're not great at teaching and reading. They think they're fine. They're fine. They're fine. Do I want Alice to have teacher C? This person just graduated from a top-notch residency program. They had like some of the best induction that you could get into the profession. This person's got like the sort of the newest knowledge in brain-based teaching, science of reading. They're fine at teaching math. They might be one of the people that say, yeah, I'm not really a math person. But this person's also a semi-famous YouTube crafter. And Alice, who, if you could see the amount of slime that she's created in the last week, that's kind of cool. Or here's a teacher who was driving down the hallway, literally saw one of these billboards that we put up that says, be a teacher, right? We've got a teacher shortage. There's an African-American male, represents just 2% of our educator workforce right now today, literally answered the call, the billboard call, turned up to the district, joined the profession through an emergency credential, actually has 8 years of working as a camp counselor and building relationships with kids, is literally that person that kids are magnetically drawn to, doesn't yet have any training in math and reading, but is also an incredible, illustrator of comic books, has a sort of a side hustle there. Each one of these teachers, you walk down the hallway, has 25 kids for the whole year. Who do you want? I think if it's me and I'm thinking about Alice, it's all of them. I actually want Alice to have all of these teachers. So how do we do that? We build a team, an educator team. Now, not a team that is getting margaritas on a Thursday night, or a PLC, or a data team, or a third grade team that meet, once a week. They even have shared planning time, but then they all run off to their own respective rooms and close the door on the hinges and teach most of their day in isolation. We're talking about a team that is sharing this roster of 100 kids together, leveraging their respective superpowers to meet the needs of all 100 of these students. And so when we talk about building the next education workforce, this is what we're getting at. We're getting at the idea that if we're serious about meeting the needs of all of our students, not some, all of our students, and that we really want to pull off something that is curricularly more complex, then open up your books to page 57, that's truly deeper and more personalized. I'm not convinced that we can do this in a one teacher, one classroom model. I actually think that we need to bring teams of educators with distributed expertise around shared rosters of kids, that we move away from a teacher of record into a team of record. And that it turns out that the moment that you do that, that you create all of these new and interesting ways to enter the profession differently, to like specialize as educators, to advance as educators, to actually add more flexibility into educators' lives and calendars and schedules. I think this key is really about an educator team and moving away from this one teacher, one classroom model. Let's talk a little bit more about it, and let's unpack this statement specifically. So when you say team of educators, here's the one chili pepper version of teams of educators. Literally, just take the same 4 people that had 25 kids in each of their rooms, and now actually bring them together around a shared roster of students, and that they have actual collective autonomy over their calendar or their schedule, that they can group and regroup those 100 kids in all kinds of dynamic ways, that maybe teacher A is taking the lead in planning ELA and math lessons, and teacher D is never doing that, right? Or maybe they're sharing plan, but there's the team knows their kids, the educator team is actually able, with some collective autonomy, to build the right learning environment to meet the needs of those 100 kids, given the curricular ambitions that they're trying to pull off. And so if that was 1 chili pepper, this is 2 chili peppers. Notice what happened here. We added a position of a lead teacher. The lead teacher now has maybe more pay. They have some additional responsibilities for coordinating this cast of team. Maybe you've created a new position entirely. Teacher D no longer actually exists in the system. Teacher D is now what we might call a student success coach, who's responsible for not 100 of the kids, but maybe 15 of the kids, checking in and checking out at the beginning and end of each day, because they need that. They're thinking about the social and emotional growth and development of this small clutch of kids. Maybe there are ways that we could leverage these people in blue are community educators, right? Maybe they're high dosage tutors, because the moment that you as a team of teachers are already thinking about how are we going to group and regroup our kids using data? Well, now if you've got access to tutors, you've already done some of that work. Now you just have more human capital to add to that equation. Or maybe those are parents that have been trained up in reading with kids, or maybe they are high school CTE students that are coming in because they're interested in education. You want to actually let them work with kids. Maybe you've taken an existing para-educator role over here in the green and created a new role called digital learning facilitator. And you've upskilled a para-educator and you've given them $1 or $2 more an hour to create a little more vertical structure within your para position. And maybe you've aligned with your local college of education around letting that count toward a para to professional educator pathway. See how your mind starts racing when you start to play with what's possible. We figured out ways to pay teacher candidates into these models. And then you start to do this school-wide, and then you start to dream up other positions like this community educator coordinator. Holy smokes, coordinating their high dosage tutors or industry mentors or whoever they are, whether they're paid or not paid, that's work. Maybe your bookstore person or front office person now has an additional responsibility of helping with the coordination of those people. We think about more ways to add additional capacity to the system and shift some of those responsibilities off of our educators. Special educators, we have teams where those people are not, pulling kids out, but they're actually integrated onto the teams because that there's enough among those 100 kids to justify that the special educator is actually embedded on those teams full time. And then it is absolutely changing learning, not just for the kids on that person's roster or caseload, but for all the kids. Because if we really are serious about universal design for learning, it turns out that all kids are going to benefit from this, right? And so we've got teams that have the special educators on them. We've also got special educator teams that have areas of particular expertise and that they're like working with other teams at school. So you get a sense of how this could actually play out. You would rightfully be asking, but Brent, like you had 4 people, now you got like a bunch of people. Won't this cost $1 bajillion? The answer is it could and probably should, but let's be real, we don't have like huge Scrooge McDuck piles of cash. So we've worked with ERS, Educational Resource Strategies. All these slides will be available to you, and we'll make sure that you can click into all the links. Around financially sustainable staffing models and what are the shifts and changes in time and money that we can do with existing dollars within the schools and systems, thinking creatively about it to actually make what I just showed you a reality. All right, continuing into the statement, if we just talked about building teams of educators, let's talk about with distributed expertise. What the heck does that mean? Well, if right now, like we expected each one of those teachers to have to know all things about all people at all times, what if instead of organizing ourselves around a grade level, like we're going to put 3rd grade in the middle of like, like that's how we're thinking, or we're going to put biology or science in the middle. What if we started putting kids in the middle and then ask ourselves, what's the right set of adults with the right set of superpowers to come around each of our learners or sets of learners? And when you do that, I think that it allows educators to lean into their strengths. You can task shift outside of the team or even within the team. And we saw this happen during COVID, right? In really interesting and powerful ways where it was like, okay, the 3 of us are 3rd grade teachers. You figure out like how to use Google Classroom. You go figure out literally where our kids are. And there's got to be better ways to teach on Zoom. You go figure that out. Okay, let's get back together in 2 hours. And like our educators literally did that. Like that's how we actually survived those first few months, especially of the pandemic. And if you're paying attention, like this is actually at the root of this idea of bringing teams of educators together around shared common rosters of kids. This notion of all students is really important to us from an equity perspective. And again, like this is back to this idea about access to excellent and experienced educators, access to demanding content and deeper learning. This shouldn't be left to like, if you ended up in teacher A's classroom, guess what? It's going to be awesome this year. But if you ended up in teacher B's classroom, well, maybe this 3rd part around technology and personalized learning would actually be more likely to happen in B's classroom than A's classroom, right? And so if we're really serious about making sure that kids have access to all of the best, I think there are ways that we can organize our kids and adults differently so that it actually happens. And this is especially true for some of our most vulnerable learners, right? Who imagine that you are a kid and that you get a first-year teacher in 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade. I love first-year teachers. Like they're some of my favorite people. They're hungry. And imagine that you got a 15-year veteran, nationally board certified teacher in 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade. I just promise you that the trajectory of kids is going to be different. But it doesn't have to be that way because we could actually organize our systems differently. So this idea of deeper and personalized learning, I say that really intentionally. Like, and some people would like quibble with me and say, Brent, if you have deeper learning, you have personalized. If you have personalized learning, you have deeper learning. Or like, actually, you shouldn't talk about that at all. You should talk about student-centered learning. I think for me, at the end of the day, I'm less concerned about the words and I'm more concerned about like walking into a learning environment and seeing educators excited about the work that's happening and learners excited about the work that's happening, that is inspiring, it's connected to themselves, it's culturally sustaining. It's like all of the things that as a parent, when I walk into a room that I want to see. And again, right, like I tried to do this as a nationally board certified teacher, and I did a pretty freaking good job, like in years like 5, 6, 7, but like years 1, 2, 3, 4, like I was like, I wish I was better. Some of my students might watch this at some point. Like I tried real hard, right? Like, but like we can do better by deeper and personalized learning, because it turns out that like teaching is really hard and sophisticated and complex, and not doing that alone is way better. And if we're really serious about interdisciplinary, because it turns out that that's the way that the world actually is, working and organized, we've actually got all the right talent. We just need to allow educators to dream and give them permission to integrate in ways that right now, like we've, again, systematically, especially at the secondary level, literally like created a bell schedule that prevents that from happening or makes it really hard. There are people that are pulling this off, and I applaud you, and we need to learn more from you, and it's really hard. We move into the second part of this anchoring statement, the ability to empower educators. I think this is really important. When we survey educators, we ask them, what's really important to you? Like this idea of letting them have more control over their schedule, over the exact order in which things are taught, to have time to work and plan with their colleagues. Like these are things that they actually want to spend way more time on than they're allowed to. And we also know that having more autonomy, and instead of individual autonomy, I like this idea of collective autonomy, like trusting the team to do what's right with some guardrails, obviously, but do what's right for their kids. And to have that, like that's part of the reason that people stick around in this work. We know that it's a leading indicator of retention. We know that it's what interesting, smart, creative people want. And so are there ways that we can help to deliver on that? When we talk about new ways to enter the profession, like imagine entering the profession as, in the one teacher, one classroom model versus entering the profession as a member of a team. Like we see this time and again, we like have these like this idea of a dip, right? We know in October, this is really hard for first year teachers. What if you weren't crying alone in your car, but like rather you had this team of educators that were supporting you and that you could shift and you could take on just right responsibilities over time. We think that there are ways that we could actually change professional learning and allow educators to specialize. Imagine as a district HR person that you're not hiring a second grade teacher, but you're hiring someone that has experience working with young people, but you know that they're going onto a team where they need to know something about trauma-informed instruction, and they need to know something about data-driven instruction, because those are the two pieces that the team really is lacking. And it would be really awesome if we could also bolster some of our knowledge of sort of upper level math. Like these are the sorts of conversations that like, wouldn't it be great if we weren't just trying to staff the room, but rather build a team that really allowed people to specialize. And I think that this is not just happening at the level of our professional educators, but it's happening at the level of para-educators. I think that it's happening at the level of educational leaders. You start to build those lead teacher positions onto these teams, it fundamentally does two things. It changes the job of the building level principal, and it fundamentally provides you a bench depth of leaders who can become future principals without leaving the classroom. And we take a lot of inspiration from people like Brian and Emily Hassel at Opportunity Culture, who have been for many years working with this idea of multi-classroom leaders. Like there is something to this that we think is really important for our profession. We don't need all 3.5 million educators to be able to do this. But if we had 10 to 20% of them, like that's pretty interesting. We're almost done with this anchoring statement. This idea of advancing in the profession. What if it actually was easier to advance? What if we could create systems that valued, if you're a community educator, maybe there are ways to become para-educators. If you're a community educator, maybe there are ways to become professional educators. You can try out this idea of working in schools as a reading tutor, but like maybe that also counts toward your degree, or you're a para-educator becoming a professional educator, or a professional educator becoming an educational leader. Like we need to stop thinking in terms of sort of cul-de-sacs around like individual positions and start thinking about avenues, right, or streets, thoroughfares that allow people to progress throughout an entire career of teaching. We've got to be better about this. And some of this is creating new specific roles for people to play into that allow them to capitalize on their strengths. And so that brings us to the conclusion of like, hey, like, what if we actually stopped placing one teacher in a classroom with a group of kids and instead started building these teams with distributed expertise to deliver on this promise of deeper and personalized learning for a shared roster of kids. And at the moment that you do that, I am 100% convinced that it actually allows people to interpret the profession differently, specialize, advance, allow for a more flexible teacher workday or schedule. And then hopefully your minds are racing at this point in the conversation about like, oh, I think I could try this, or this would be interesting. Or if I ask my group of educators to start to brainstorm within this like more nimble and flexible space, what would happen? And it turns out when given the opportunity to dream, people build a lot of really cool stuff. And so that's like at the core of our first big idea here, which is that if you think of Next Education Workforce as like a binder with a bunch of tabs, and you can take it in your local context and open up to the first tab and run a play, you're going to be sorely disappointed. It's not that. We have some fundamental design tenets that we see as successful across these models, but ultimately, even within a single school, I might argue, that the teams coming around a shared roster of kids look different. If you've got a bunch of rookie teachers, you're going to build a different team than if you've got a bunch of seasoned veterans. If you have a high caseload of students with special needs or particular learning needs, you're going to build a different team than if you don't. And that's like exactly what should happen. When we think about these elements of the Next Education Workforce, we think that this happens at the team level, the school level, and the systems level. Again, you'll get all these links and all these docs, but we think that there are, a handful of key design tenets at each of those levels that allow these models to really flourish and succeed. What have we been up to? Like for the last few years, there's been a pandemic, some other things have happened. But 4 years ago, we were working literally with one school district, one school, one educator team of 3 teachers coming together around 85 kids. At the beginning of this fall term, what we see is that this idea is catching on and that we're working across 10 school systems. 45 schools are building these models. We've got about 123 educator teams impacting nearly 10,000 learners. And we're excited by what we're seeing. We know that if this is going to last, if this isn't like a thing, it has to happen at the speed of trust. And at the speed of trust, also, in our experience, usually starts with a few small, call them pilots or call them early adopters in this work. 2 case studies here, Stevenson Elementary, they started with a single 3rd grade team. It was literally 3 educators and a couple of student teachers who came together around a shared roster of kids during the pandemic. And what ended up happening was that when everyone else was totally stressed out, this team was navigating it pretty well. And that the other educators at the school were like, wait a second, what's happening in 3rd grade? And the 3rd grade teachers were talking about it. And then the rest of the school and other families went to the principal and said, hey, I know your plan is to expand this to 4th grade next year, but can we go school wide? And then they went school wide. And then this year, I guess it was technically spring of last year, the educators at the school were like, you know what's super weird? 3rd grade, that's super weird because we've got kids that are reading at a 1st grade level and doing math at a 5th grade level. What if we just expanded the age bands of this? And so now they have 1st and 2nd grade, 3rd and 4th grade, right? And this was the educators were asking for this. Different story than what happened at Westwood High School. They spent 2 years with 3 teams trying to get the model right at the 9th grade level. 150 kids on each of these teams. And then they decided to spend to all of 9th grade. And now they're thinking about, okay, what does this look like in 10th grade in this year? They learned a lot of lessons. They fell forward. They had the cover and protection from the school leader and from the district leaders to try something new. And they felt empowered to do that. And then this has to be good for students, families, and educators. And if it isn't, we shouldn't do it, full stop. We're early in the work. What we're finding is that educators in these team-based models, this is Johns Hopkins did an external study of this work. We can give you the link there. They're more satisfied, basically 75 to 66%. We have other measures within the district HR systems where we're seeing 10 to 20 point improvements in educator satisfaction who are working these team-based models. They're undeniably collaborating more. That'd be weird if they weren't, but both in planning, but more importantly, during implementation. And that's the piece where it's they're not by themselves during implementation. They're actually collaborating during the school day with kids in the mix. They believe, and we were really worried about this. We thought, oh my gosh, what happens when you put more adults around more kids? Are kids going to fall through the cracks? Are we worried about it? And what we found was that the educators, because they weren't putting 3rd grade or biology in the center of their team meetings, but instead they were putting kids at the center of their team meetings, that all of the educators on the team feel like they have better student-teacher interaction. They feel like they know their kids better. And then they also believe that if they had to go out for 10 days for some sort of COVID quarantine, or they had to miss a day, they knew their kids were going to keep learning even in their absence. And that was really powerful. some people come to this conversation because like, oh my gosh, we have a critical teacher, shortage. Like people are burning out. Like that's a good reason to come to this conversation. And if you don't believe in all of this stuff on the right, that you really think that there are better ways to deliver whole child supports, that you really think that we can do a better job of diversifying our workforce, creating new pathways into the profession, that we believe that we're leaving a lot of talent on the table because there are members of our community that could be playing way bigger role. That's the reason to really do this work, because it's honestly pretty hard, because changing the way that we've done school for a really long time is like hard work. And who do we see that's most successful in this work? The readiness conditions of our strongest partners. I mean, none of this is surprising. It's people with a shared vision that believe in the right-hand side of this, that they have a willingness to actually question and challenge the long-held assumptions, that they can navigate that uncertainty, that they have a willingness to actually say, yep, we're going to give you some room to run here, and we trust you, set of educators, that there's this culture of collaboration. Maybe they're already experimenting with new roles or leveraging the community in really productive ways, and that they're really committed to this idea of teams with distributed expertise, a learner-centered model, and thinking of new ways to enter and specialize in the profession.